Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is 7 o'clock, and we know that this world is demanding a lot of everybody. So we're going to try to get started right on time and move through this as quickly as we can. My name is Jessica. For those of you who might be new here, I'm the executive director of Wild Cumberland, and we are a grassroots nonprofit staffed entirely by volunteers. Joining me tonight is one of those volunteers and a board member, Danny Purvis, and she is joining me to help us walk you through the proposed changes from the National Park Service for their 2026 Visitor Use Management Plan. We've got some visuals that will help maybe contextualize some of the changes that they've proposed. We will be having time for questions and discussions part of the way through the evening. So if you will just hold on to those, you're welcome to drop them in chat, but you can come off mute later in the discussion. Just raise your hand and we'll be taking questions and be answering them the best that we can. We've done our very best to try and digest what the National Park Service has proposed. So that's all I can offer is that we'll do our best in answering those questions. For those of you who might not have had, the time to read the 265-page plan. And we'll make sure that you're equipped to make your public comments, hopefully by the time the night's over. So with that being said, it might be helpful to give a little context, especially since we have some newcomers with us tonight. Cumberland Island National Seashore is one of only 10 national seashores within the National Park Service, and it features one of the largest remaining maritime forests and one of the largest barrier island wildernesses on the East Coast. So it's really important for a whole lot of reasons. But as most of you, or some of you may know, I can't talk. As some of you may know, all of the national seashores and all of the parks have very specific and different legislation that established each unit and that guides all of the management decisions for those parks. Cumberland Island was established in 1972 and with some very specific language. So I thought it might be good to sort of center it and focus on that before we walk through some of the changes. Many of you are familiar with the language that Cumberland Island shall be permanently preserved in its primitive state, and that no development of the project or plan for the convenience of visitors is supposed to be undertaken that would be incompatible with the preservation of flora, fauna, and other physiographic conditions. So I think that's a good place to sort of center our discussion tonight, and for those who are not as familiar with our perspective on the work. But with that, I think we will get started and say that the details that we're going to cover tonight are intended to be an amendment to the park's general management plan and should be considered as such. So if you can understand the significance of that, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But with that, I think I'll turn it over and let Danny sort of start to walk you through some visuals. And does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, next slide, please.
All right, so this first slide shows you a little bit about what the agency feels the proposed action should accomplish and why it was developed. As I mentioned just a minute ago, this revises really substantial pieces of the park's general management plan from 1984. It does also redefine or define differently the desired conditions throughout the park and make some changes to zoning and commercial use of the seashore. So I think it's important to sort of contextualize that, and you can read on your screen, of course, the language that the agency has used in prioritizing this plan. But I think that's probably enough.
Yep. Okay, next slide. All right, so thank you again for joining. Again, my name is Danny Purvis, and I'm really excited to dive into some public engagement with y'all. So I'm going to review the proposed action and preferred alternative. We just want to note that other than a no change option that the Park Service has proposed, they have offered one preferred alternative.
For public consideration.
For public consideration. And so this is what you'll be commenting on. So we've kind of broken this up into some large categories, and I will also show you visually where all of these changes exist on the island. But as you can see on the map that's displayed on the slide, this is the Park Services map that they've presented in the VUMP. So one thing that this map doesn't capture is their proposed increase in visitor capacity from 300 to 700 daily visitors. They haven't defined an actual limit to the number of visitors that would increase. And one thing to note is that this only accounts for folks arriving to the island by ferry. This is a 133% increase, so more than double what is currently allowed on the island. And 300 was defined in the 1984 General Management Plan. So within the suite of changes they're proposing, they are also increasing camping capacity from 220 to 304 campers every night. And that would be a 38% increase in camper capacity. They're expanding the campsites to include 4 new campsites in front country, back country, and in wilderness. And then they'll be abandoning 1 wilderness campsite, and that's Yankee Paradise. Along with that, they're increasing the infrastructure around Nightingale Beach. So they are introducing 2 new beach pavilions in the dune field. They're about 3/4 of a mile apart. And then the front country campsite will also include a bathhouse and associated infrastructure. That would be like a septic leach field, water utility line extension, and potentially an extension of the electricity utility line. Next slide. Okay, they're also proposing to add some trails and routes. So at the front country campsite, there will be 1 new trail spur, so an extension of existing trail, and that is a beach crossing. They are authorizing and extending bicycle and e-bike trail on the shoreline for up to 100 bicycles daily. They have proposed an 18-mile kayak trail from the southern tip of the island and then along the back barrier up to Brick Hill Bluff. They're proposing a new ferry route up to Plum Orchard for up to 100 daily visitors. And then in terms of commercial use, they're proposing an on-island retail store, kayak and canoe rental, and expanded motorized concession tours. So now we're going to look in more detail at where these proposals take place on the island. And we first wanted to start with Nightingale. This is the front country campsite that they're proposing to build. And as you can see here, there are a number of associated developments and construction at this site. So besides the campsite, there's also a bathhouse. And again, that has associated infrastructure like an extension of the water utility line. And that would go along the entire length of the Nightingale Trail, extending from the road. They have proposed to either use solar panels to power the bathhouse, or they would extend the existing electricity utility line. And so that's one thing that you can certainly comment on. And then adjacent to the bathhouse is the Nightingale Pavilion, the beach pavilion. And then again, the red line that you see here on the map is the trail spur that they would create that would form a new beach crossing and go through the dune fields.
And for those of you who are familiar with Sea Camp, and some of you here certainly are, this campsite is just south of Sea Camp, and they've actually sort of already extended parallel trail, if you've noted, from its Sea Camp crossing all the way to Nightingale Trail.
All right, so now we're going to look at the backcountry and wilderness campsites. So again, they're proposing to abandon Yankee Paradise and then to disperse the wilderness camping to 2 sites at Tunahowie and Sweetwater. And I'm sorry, the words are a little bit hard to read, but Tunahowie is the back barrier site at the top of the map. Yep. And Sweetwater is on the eastern side of the island, and that is adjacent to Lake Whitney. Some important details to note about Sweetwater campsite is that they won't be building a well to draw water. The drinking water they're actually suggesting would come from Lake Whitney. And I will note that Lake Whitney is typically brackish, and there is an alligator population in Lake Whitney. So that is one thing to consider. Tunahowie, Brick Hill Bluff, the other existing back barrier wilderness campsite, and then the backcountry campsite of Hunt Camp would all be accessible by motorized and non-motorized boats. Hunt Camp it currently exists, but as of right now, it's only available for reservation for the 6 managed hunts annually, and they would open this up as a permanent site that is reservable at all times, of course, besides the 6 managed hunts.
And administrative use by the agency.
Right. One thing that we will note about the backcountry sites, that would be Stafford and Hunt Camp, is that they're described as backcountry, but they do have a lot of the front country amenities like electricity and potable water. And so
Backcountry may not be quite the right,
the right
category
term.
to include those.
Yeah. All right. So first, I'm going to talk about the map on the left of the screen. So this is shoreline developments that they've proposed. So first is the Nightingale and Dungeness beach pavilions at the bottom of the map there. And like I said, those are about 3/4 of a mile apart. And then the purple line along the shoreline is the extension of beach access for bicycles and e-bikes. And the Park Service, as of yet, has not authorized bike use. It has just been allowed, but it hasn't gone through a NEPA process yet. But they're proposing essentially to authorize bike use along the shoreline and the roads. And this extension would go from Sea Camp up to Stafford. On the map to the right, this is sort of a bigger look at the island. The blue line that runs along the western side of the island, along the back barrier, is the 18-mile proposed kayak trail. And it will also come with the kayak and canoe rental service on the island. They haven't identified specifically which location, but we've marked those locations that they've proposed for you with the little blue boats. And that would be at Plum Orchard, Sea Camp, Dungeness, or at Beach Creek, which is at the southern tip of the island. One difference in this proposal compared to the 2022 VUMP is that they're no longer proposing a Beach Creek campsite and associated loading dock.
Yeah, it was like a boat landing zone they originally proposed.
But they would still potentially have an access point for kayaks and canoes at Beach Creek. So that's all the blue markers on the map. The purple line that runs alongside the back barrier and that runs adjacent to the kayak trail is what we presume will be the route for the Plum Orchard ferry, which again, they've proposed to transport up to 100 visitors daily up to Plum Orchard. It's kind of hard to distinguish from the blue line. That's the kayak trail, and that's because presumably they would be pretty much overlapping. And so the other addition would be the on-island store, the retail store that would have things like camping supplies as well as souvenirs, books, etc. They didn't identify a location for that. Our sort of guess is that it might be at Sea Camp or at Dungeness, and so we've flagged that. But again, that actually has not been identified yet in their plans. So this is getting into the weeds of how they've developed the plan and sort of the indicators that they're using to ensure that the visitor capacity analysis is appropriate. They do say that action may be taken to address visitor use in the park if they exceed thresholds for visitor capacity. And we'll show you a little bit more in the next slide on what visitor capacity looks like across the island. But in order to calculate the visitor capacity analysis, they use the number of people per viewshed and the number of people encountered on trails per day in designated wilderness. And essentially, the plan says that if they exceed the thresholds at particular locations, they would use an adaptive management strategy. It's not clear to us exactly what that means, if that means that they might restrict access to certain areas or adjust the visitor capacity limit of 700. In addition, they will also be monitoring the number of people entering posted closures of sensitive shorebird areas, which again is a part of their adaptive management strategy. And it's not clear to us how often they'll be monitoring these indicators. Other things they'll be monitoring are the nest sites for American oyster catcher pairs, least tern colonies, and other species of concern, as well as sea turtle nest site monitoring and disturbances. And that's a part of the annual monitoring effort that DNR organizes.
Yeah, I think that that's a bare bones approach to the type of monitoring and changes that we might expect if they implement this plan. Maybe we should talk about that a little more as we go on.
Yeah, and one more thing that I'll say about monitoring methods is that they have suggested a few different methods that they would use to monitor all of these indicators. And those range from trail cams that they may or may not mark, and potentially using rangers to go and actually do counts of people at various sites. But that's not fully elucidated in the plan. So we're not going to go over these tables in too much detail, but this is sort of the result of the visitor capacity analysis. So these are the number of people at one time at each site throughout the island. I think there are a few kind of notable things to take away from this slide. First, if you add up the visitor capacity across each site that they've identified, that comes to a total of about 1,300 people who could potentially be at each site across the island at one time.
It's a big number.
It's a big number. That is a part of how they've derived the 700 people visitor capacity. The other thing that we would note is that this doesn't clarify if these people are exclusively coming from the ferry or if there are private methods of getting to the island factored into these numbers. And we guess that it is really about ferry numbers exclusively because a lot of the private sites on the island, like Grayfield Inn, are omitted from these numbers. And so it's, the plan does not clarify exactly where these numbers come from. And again, there's no clear definition of what adaptive management looks like if they were to exceed these thresholds.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, is that we are assuming that these numbers are based on the ferry passengers they've allocated daily. But because they don't provide any data, historical or projected, related to private use, private boaters and or any other commercial or group use that they have potentially proposed in this plan. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
All right, so as Jess had mentioned, we've done our best to get through this 265-page plan and think kind of critically about what is missing from this plan that is really important for a well-informed plan. And some of this is potentially just missing data. Some of it might be a lack of transparency for the public. So first, relevant data. There's no clear data justifying a visitor capacity increase. So it's not clear if there are a lack of available services and sites relative to visitor demand, or what is exactly driving such a large, 133% increase in visitor capacity. There's also a lack of current and relevant data sources. So a lot of the data that they use in the plan are, relatively outdated. The visitor use data, for example, come from 2019. So, it's pretty well documented that national park use trends have changed pretty dramatically post-COVID. So that's a little bit concerning for us. The visitor surveys that they've used were collected as late as 2012. There have, as far as we know, been no additional visitor surveys conducted in the last decade. They lack any kind of real ecological indicators in their visitor capacity analysis and in the full environmental assessment. And that is concerning for preserving, the ecological integrity of the island. They also didn't factor in night sky quality or acoustic analysis to ensure that we're preserving
The basic values of the park.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in terms of planning and mitigation, we first wanted to center the lack of reference to the 2024 land exchange. There are several parcels of land that they're proposing to exchange. There's no record of decision around the land exchange, and it certainly will impact visitor use on the island. There are no staffing or funding plans or even a visitor safety plan outlined in this version of VUMP. There continues to be no proposed wilderness management plan, and I will note for you that 56% of the island is designated wilderness or potential wilderness that is mandated to have a wilderness management plan, and they still have not proposed one since 1982. There is no feral horse management plan, and they've omitted the business plan and land protection plan. And then other agency documents, they do not reference the natural resource condition assessment.
Which was the most recent comprehensive sort of evaluation about the park's natural resources and their conditions and how to best protect them for future generations. And then, the last two links on here that Danny was going to mention before I interrupted her, are a foundation document that was done in 2014 and a general management plan, both of which they reference, but the public can't easily access through the links and the web pages that the agency has provided. So I'll note that here because obviously all these materials are available on our website, but if you have any trouble identifying or locating information that you're looking for, we're more than happy to help you with that process. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we've sort of outlined some high-level concerns about this plan that we wanted to bring to your attention. The first being the lack of transparency that the Park Service has had from the development of the plan and how they've obtained public input to the limited interface thus far about this new proposal, and no opportunity for a town hall for the public to ask questions about the plan directly to the Park Service. We've also requested an extension for the public comment period and have not, as of now, received any response. So if you feel like you personally would benefit from an additional 30 days to review the plan, we encourage you to email the Superintendent Melissa Trenchik. We've got her email address on a future slide. Please contact them and let them know that you need more time. Again, there's no staffing or funding plan. despite there being a very large loss of permanent staff and some major funding cuts to the Park Service. The staffing and funding plans have been omitted since the 2022 plan that they proposed. And there's no plan for additional interpretation, emergency services, or other permanent staff, which leads us to our concerns about some of the safety issues in the plan, or gaps, I should say. So there need to be some clear safety plans to address increasing visitor capacity, the managed hunts, the unmanaged feral horse population, water quality issues. Again, I will point out that people will be sourcing their water, their drinking water, from Lake Whitney, which is a typically brackish water source. And so having a water quality testing plan is very important for public health. Increasing human-wildlife interfaces, which will certainly happen when you more than double the visitor capacity, improper bike use and potential for injury, storm contingency plans, and risks associated with enhanced kayak and canoe recreational opportunities. We also find the socioeconomic analysis in the plan to be insufficient. There are no mitigation measures to ensure the accessibility or affordability of the park, even though this park collects recreation fees.
Yeah, and let me just interject there for those of you who are maybe unaware with this of what this acronym stands for and why it's important to this discussion. FLREA stands for something called the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. And what that does is allow park managers to charge fees for certain recreation within their unit. And what that means is that 80% of those fees are required to go back into reinvestment into visitor services within the park unit from which they were derived. The other 20% gets kicked back up into a big pot that all of the parks can benefit from. But I do think it's important when we're talking about some of the things that the agency has proposed, and particularly given the volume increase of visitors and how we think about that structure and what it means for the future of the park and future development.
Yeah, and the environmental assessment also notes that there's a potential for the ferry ticket price to decrease or increase, and that they say that issue is not within the scope of the visitor use management plan, which we find to be maybe a little bit concerning.
Most folks here too have experienced the fee increase since even the last plan was introduced in 2022.
Right.
For that fee.
Yeah, actually the ferry price increased during the government shutdown. Yeah. In terms of the impacts to wilderness, we again are concerned about not establishing a wilderness management plan to ensure that this visitor increase has mitigated impacts on the wilderness. There are no wilderness character baseline data available for public review, and they're not proposing additional wilderness interpretation at Plum Orchard or to hire a wilderness ranger. And, 100 people arriving at Plum Orchard, most of them are going to end up walking into the wilderness area, and we strongly encourage teaching people the principles of leave no trace, and remaining aware of what wilderness character actually means and how to respect that. And then the ecological impact on the island, a 133% increase in visitation and 38% increase in campers are certainly going to have an ecological impact on the island, but the absence of ecological indicators or best available science are lacking. And we really want to point out for you that they acknowledge that there are long-term coastal threats with sea level rise and with increasing storm impact, but there are no mitigation measures to really address those coastal threats. So the last things that we wanted to make you aware of are that we do have some great public comment resources available on our website. I'll be dropping the link in the chat shortly, but I just want to make you aware of some really helpful resources. First, we've got a great interactive map where you can hover your mouse over the different sites that are highlighted on the map, and this background pop-up window will show up to give you a sense of what the proposal is and some risks and changes that we've identified that those proposals will have on the island.
Yeah, I really appreciate how hard our volunteers have been working to make sure that this is visually more understandable for all of you. So you should play with and explore that tool on our website after this meeting. I think you'll find it really valuable and insightful.
And then other resources, if you scroll below the map, we have some background on various concerns that we've organized categorically for you. So these are drop-down menus. You can click on wilderness concerns, for example, and it will give you some information about the legislation designating wilderness and its intent and some of the areas where we think the VUMP might not be aligned with the original intent. We also have created a public comment template for you to make your life very easy. So if you just click on the link that says access sample letter on Google Drive, you can copy and paste some language, modify it, personalize it. And there's also a link in that document directly to the public comment portal for you. So it makes it very easy for you to prepare your own comments. And then we also have some documents for reference linked there for you. And again, like Jessica said, if you are looking for something and you can't find it, you're welcome to come to us. Of course, you can also email Superintendent Trenchik, but we're always happy to help you find whatever resources you need.
Yeah, and if you see anything that we've missed or maybe misinterpreted, I think it's really important to make sure you understand that we want to hear from you. It's a lot of information for our volunteers to come through in addition to their other responsibilities in life. And we certainly could have gotten something wrong or missed something. So I think it's really important to stress that this is a back and forth communication and dialogue with what you've observed about the plan and where your concerns are. So I think with that, it's probably about the right time to stop talking ourselves and listen to some of the questions that you all may have. This was meant as a generally, high level overview about what the agency has proposed. And we certainly can't, in this amount of time, get into all of the specifics about how these proposed changes would really impact wilderness character, and the general primitive recreational experience that the wilderness has provided all of us for the last 50 years. But I do want to hear from those of you who've joined us tonight about anything that we haven't covered or where there may need some clarification, and we'll do our best to try and interpret what the agency has presented. So with that, I'd love to see, if you guys will raise your hand, it might help. I know it's hard to get started, but if you have a question, raise your hand, and I would love for you to unmute yourself. We just want to make sure we can hear you well, and we'll proceed. So if anybody is brave enough to be our first question, we would love to see a hand so we can try and address any questions or concerns.
And you're also welcome to use the chat function if you'd prefer not to talk.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Jess, I'll go first. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. So to me, when I was reading this, it largely looked like we needed a lot of additional evaluations and detailed reporting on what could be happening on the island. For instance, the dark sky, the noise, the additional ecological impact. Are there any particular terms or evaluations that we can put in our comments to ensure that they know what we're talking about, and processes that we can add in there, like the NEPA process, et cetera? Is there anything like that that we can discuss and put in our comments to ensure that they know that we are paying attention for this and putting the right language in the comments to get their larger buy-in, hopefully?
We're figuring that out. Okay. We'll get better at this. Okay, there. Got it. We'll get better at this as we go on. Thank you, Anna, for being brave enough to offer the first question. And that one's a doozy. So, as most of you know, a lot of the National Environmental Policy Act and other regulations that require a more comprehensive analysis have been removed or changed in some way recently. A lot of those are being currently litigated and challenged, of course, in the courts. But it is important to remember that this is considered an environmental assessment of their project and that this is the full scope of what the agency believes is required for their analysis in order to move forward. So what we could expect is for them to potentially take any public comments they've received into consideration, and they may either amend the plan as it's been proposed, or they could proceed with a record of decision. So sometimes there's something called an environmental impact statement, an EIS, and that does require a little deeper digging on what the agency's proposed and how it would impact the environment. But in this instance, even though it does amend the agency's general management plan, they have chosen to do an environmental assessment. So I think you'll find some of that language there in the document that Danny has put together for you guys. But certainly we'll continue to share and update that with more information as it becomes available.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
And I would plug the resources that we have available on the website, especially our concerns by category. If there are particular concerns that you have, we've got some language in there, including the legislation, the enabling legislation that you might prefer to cite. There are suggested talking points commented out in the public comment template that you can use to help sort of guide some of the high-level points that you might want to address in your comments.
I do think it's important to provide that detail when you submit your comments, because we've found that often just opposition to what the agency has proposed without a lot of detail has somewhat been ignored. And so the more detail you can provide about how their plan might personally affect your recreation experience and future generations' recreational experiences on Cumberland, I think is really what's critical. Cool.
Okay. I'm going to come off mute.
You calling on me? Dave Kyler? Hello?
That's okay.
Am I being heard?
Yes.
Okay. This is not boilerplate for bureaucratic regulation talk, but I think it has some relevance to some of the stuff we talked about in the other prior meeting. And that is the distinction between daily visitation and group size. And anybody who's taken statistics may remember something called a Poisson distribution. That is essentially when it rains, it pours kind of thing. In other words, the aggregation of larger groups is not the same as averaging a certain number of people throughout the day, which may be the simplistic assumption leading to highly erroneous analysis. So keep in mind that you might want to look it up to use it as a as a leverage point of achieving greater credibility. The Poisson distribution, arrival rates that are aggregate more people sometimes than others, so much so that it undermines the value of the experience.
Yep. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we
that's
appreciate that comment.
very helpful. I'm going to read some of the questions from the chat.
Great.
So first, Max asked, does the wilderness designation mean no motors? And Colleen did respond, yes, except on the main road and beach driving by residents with state licenses. Over 300 licenses issued to residents.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that discussion. Um, Public waterways in the state of Georgia are just that. They are publicly accessible. And so the logic that we've seen reflected in the plan about wilderness campsites being accessible by motorized boat is that the waterways themselves are public and therefore they must accommodate that user entrance at those points. There has always been an issue related to something called concurrent jurisdiction on Cumberland Island National Seashore. And it addresses the complexity of co-management between the state and the federal governments and those agencies. So it is not straightforward. The agency does have authority to assert its own policies and regulations within its boundary, and the boundary of the seashore actually extends into the public waterways. So theoretically, the agency might be able to assert itself and suggest that motorized access to wilderness campsites is not appropriate for this site, but that remains to be seen if the agency would take that position, much like other issues that we face with concurrent jurisdiction on Cumberland Island. So hope that helps. Maybe we can talk more about that if we need to.
All right, so the next question, just to clarify, if you sign up for the Plum Orchard tour, is it bus only from Sea Camp? Do any boats dock at Plum Orchard now? Trying to understand the impact of the excess traffic if they were to dock at Plum Orchard with the new proposal. And there was a response that there is a dock at Plum Orchard already. As far as the ferry only goes up there once a year at the moment for the Plum Orchard holiday tour.
Yeah, so Plum Orchard is sort of situated within the wilderness of Cumberland Island, which is already, a very linear, narrow wilderness as a barrier island. What they're proposing when they want to drop 100 people to Plum Orchard is unclear if they would be campers, if they would be day trippers, or if they would be confined to the Plum Orchard area. They have been clear that it would be a goal of 100 visitors dropped to that dock on a daily basis. In conjunction, they are reviving something from a transportation management plan that is somewhat dated, where they can offer vehicular tours between Sea Camp and Plum Orchard. So there is going to be an increase in motorized vehicle tours going between those two developed areas. And then, as you mentioned with the dock, private boaters may dock there for the day. They are not allowed at this time to dock overnight. And we do not have any numbers about the frequency or number of boaters or any sort of use patterns related to Plum Orchard dock specifically in this plan or otherwise. So Plum Orchard is primarily used for administrative purposes by the agency and for managed hunts and other types of activities and programs. But you're right that most of the time it's once a year they offer a special ferry. You can go up to Plum Orchard and see it decorated for the holidays.
All right, so next question, how do electric bikes qualify for wilderness? Several county and state parks already have problems with e-bikes. They're too fast, cutbacks off trail producing erosion, speed conflicts with other patrons.
Yeah. This is also, and I should have said this a long time ago, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a scientist. I'm an average person trying to understand all of this material, like many of you. But the agency has been held accountable for its lack of NEPA process evaluating bicycles and e-bikes specifically in many of their units. There's a group called Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility who has litigatively challenged the agency's position on bikes and e-bikes. For those who are new here, Cumberland Island's wilderness takes up the northern 2/3 of the island, but there is a road that was removed from that wilderness that sort of cuts it in half. And so the agency's logic has been that because that road exists, bikers are authorized to use it. But to our knowledge, particularly e-bikes, but bicycles nor e-bikes have ever been evaluated specifically for their risks and impacts to wilderness. Because they do bisect the wilderness, I think it's relevant. When we talk about the lithium batteries and things, the fire risks that are associated with those pieces of equipment, I do not think any of that has been studied, certainly not in this plan and in nothing that we've ever seen previously. So this plan would officially set parameters for both bicycle and e-bike use for the park unit in a way that has never been done previously. The 2002 version of this plan that we've mentioned a few times did also include bicycle and e-bike use. This plan, though, further extends that on the beach, almost to the wilderness boundary. Mm-hmm. And we do have a lot of documented use of e-bikes in wilderness at this site. So it is definitely a concern. They also sort of leave it open to reevaluate trails for bicycles in the future, which would, so I'll just mention that that's sort of left a little ambiguously in this proposal.
Mm-hmm. And there's no plan to monitor bike use to ensure that they're not going past Stafford into the wilderness area.
Yeah, they've indicated a limit on the number per day. I don't know how that would be monitored or enforced, and that you could ensure compliance. But that number also only reflects the bicycles that would be available through the ferry service. So some of you have seen, I know, boatfuls of bikes be dropped off at the seashore, and there are certainly other uses and activities happening in the seashore where bikes may not be in an official count handled by the National Park Service.
All right. Can you elaborate on the water quality parameters of this VUMP? And I can answer that. There aren't any. Water quality is really only mentioned in terms of sites that have had historically poor water quality documented, but otherwise they're not monitoring water quality within this plan. Let's see. All right, private motorboats have been landing on the south end from Florida, unregulated beach use, danger to manatees, regulation and supervision was inadequate due to funding and staff shortage. Comments?
Yes, all of those things. I would concur. In the former 2022 version of this plan, as Danny alluded earlier, they did mention a campsite and a boat docking zone or landing zone specifically that would have accommodated that type of use. Those have been eliminated from this plan. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the agency did remove those two items, which it is a very vulnerable ecosystem in that particular area. But I cannot speak to more than that.
Yeah, there are mitigation measures in the environmental assessment about preventing harm to manatee populations. They are limited. It's mostly posting signs and educating boaters about boat speed, vessel speeds, and watching for manatees and how to avoid collisions. But that is the extent, really, of the mitigation measures that they've proposed. And the signs would be posted on the docks. So if somebody doesn't dock or they don't see the signs, then, the impact might be fairly limited. All right.
Those are such good questions.
Yeah. All right. So this is a little bit longer. Someone who has backpacked the beautiful island, I've seen bad behavior, like people riding bikes on or too close to dunes, on trails and wilderness, trash in various places. A woman asked me what vet takes care of the horses. People think they are managed and they're not. I believe we need to address these important issues. Water quality is definitely an issue. Many people do not understand filtering. Yeah, do you want to talk about horses?
Well, in the 22 version and also this one, feral horses have been excluded from consideration. But I do think that when you specifically speak to increasing this much capacity, there are certainly safety measures that should be considered, in addition to understanding in the agency's own documentation that those animals are doing irreparable harm to the ecosystems they're supposed to be protecting. I would have loved to have seen the development of a feral horse management plan as a component of this project, just as we would have loved to have seen more thoughtful or more thought given to the wilderness aspects of this plan or the development of a wilderness management plan. And unfortunately, we can't speak to the agency's priorities or selection of their priorities, but we encourage you, as always, to ensure that the agency hears directly from you, because that goes further than anything that we could say. So I would encourage you to include all of those priorities in your comments and ask where those fall in their set of priorities for the site.
Yep. And yeah, definitely encourage the Park Service to manage the feral horse population for the benefit of the horses and the visitor experience. I understand that one driver for visitation increase was to potentially reduce the ferry cost in response to locals who felt the tickets were too costly. I thought there was a period every year with reduced ticket price for local residents.
They have brought that back. They do offer during the non-tourist season, local residents can receive a reduced entrance fee, or I forget how it works. I'm not local enough to be able to take advantage of it. I pay the full rate every time. But I think that we have not seen any suggestion that what they've proposed here would reduce cost barriers. It might add a lot more pressure for visitors to feel the need to spend and enrich their experience with add-ons, but I don't have any indication that running more people or more boats or faster boats is going to in any way affect the cost. And as we all know, once you've gone up in cost, nobody comes down. That's just like a, so.
Yeah, and they do say in this plan that the cost of the ferry is outside the scope of VUMP, and that would be covered in concessionaire agreements. So it's
which the public can't weigh in on.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do e-bikes fall under the need for Georgia DNR beach driving authorization? And that is a great question.
On the beach, driving is Georgia DNR's responsibility. And if e-bikes were treated as motor vehicles, they would require a special permit with authorization to drive on the beach. But as of right now, they are not considered as motor vehicles. This is something that I believe the state was, this legislative session, though, being encouraged to sort of review is our current policy on e-bikes, specifically in the state for safety reasons. So perhaps there's a reason to believe that the DNR might address beach driving and e-bikes in this session. But it's a great question.
And there are some studies happening now, like at University of Georgia. They've recently started a big study on safety impacts of e-bikes and things like that. And so I think there seems to be increasing concern about some of these considerations of e-bikes that haven't been looked at before. And so hopefully that will shape some of the policies and management of e-bikes on the island. Are there further protections for residential use in the new proposal, like seeing residents, guests driving side by side on the beach, airport vehicle use, etc.?
This plan does not address any private inholder issues. It doesn't even address the stakeholders to which they list. I mean, they say they're answering or considering this plan with stakeholders, but they don't identify who those stakeholders are. And again, the 2024 proposed land exchange is a reasonably foreseeable action that is not included in this plan or mentioned anywhere here. I think particularly given the types of commercial use, the changes they have proposed to commercial use, and some of those other moving pieces, this is a very important question to explore.
Were earlier versions of the plan ever implemented?
No, I think, what did they use the word abandoned? They abandoned the 2022 plan. I don't know what that means exactly, because this is really the same plan with very few changes and even less science. So I'm not sure how to answer that exactly. but maybe the National Park Superintendent can't.
All right, so this isn't a question, more a comment. And definitely, if you have any other questions, please get them in. Otherwise, this might be a good sort of final assessment. So here's my take after almost 3 decades of writing coastal management plans and working on islands in the Caribbean and Southeast US. Leave the visitor limit the same as now. Raise the fare for visitors. Reduce the fare for those that are mobility challenged. I've done an immense amount of research on the island and could say a lot more. Also, I have maps of archaeological sites and people go to loot them. So whenever these plans get proposed, you inevitably get, oh wait, we need to do XYZ. The details and extras are in those ellipses. So I say no to any changes to the status quo.
Appreciate that comment a lot. And in fact, there is maybe something I should mention just on the heels of that comment, which is that there are several things not mentioned in this plan that folks have asked about. And again, we can't speak, for the agency, but we've had several questions about 2 buildings or two separate areas of the island that are not mentioned in this plan. One is the Grange, which is a building that the agency is currently working to preserve and restore and has received several iterations of funding for that project. It is not reflected here for visitor use patterns or its intent specifically. And then what was the second thing I was going to say? Second building second project was a long day, and there's a lot of material in here. There was another one it escapes me now, but the chimneys at Stafford. We've had several questions about the chimneys because those are not publicly accessible, and people expected to see them, I think, as a part of this change and this plan, because those have largely been accessible to the public for the entire 50-year history of the seashore, because they are protected by a retained right property that is currently privately occupied. So unfortunately, neither the Grange nor Stafford chimneys are reflected in this plan or for any future plans for visitor use. Sorry, it took me a second there to dial it back.
Okay, so we do have a few more questions.
Good, bring them.
Yeah, I feel like it's critical to know what is driving all this change. As you mentioned in your opening, the heart of charter for the National Seashore is to preserve. Do you have any clear idea of what is driving this? We do not. We have some speculations. I will note that commercial use is expanding on the island. And, it's something that we're concerned about as visitors of the island and people who love its primitive nature. It is going to increase opportunities for the Park Service to make more money. I certainly would not say that that is what's driving it, because it's not outlined in the plan, and the data they're using to increase visitor capacities is sort of lacking. So I would say you're welcome to speculate on what might be driving it, but you're also welcome to email Superintendent Trenchick and ask if there is any clarification for what is driving the proposed plan.
I would be a little more direct and say that I think there's been a lot of pressure on parks to find solutions outside of congressional appropriations, because those have been so inconsistent. And I think I can understand a desire, particularly to ensure that a gateway community thrives. So there are reasons, I think, that could easily be extrapolated from this. But I don't think the National Park Service has a responsibility to ensure gateway communities are financially successful or private interests are financially successful. They do have a responsibility to ensure that incredible places like Cumberland Island are there for future generations. And, when I look at this plan, everything here can be found on all of the developed islands in North Carolina and South Carolina and other parts of Georgia and all the way through Florida. But you can't replicate what you can find on Cumberland Island anywhere else. And I think we have all trusted the National Park Service to be good stewards of that responsibility. So this plan is for our organization particularly insulting. And I think it's fair to say that, had they planned carefully, or maybe order of operations matters here a little, if the wilderness management plan had been thoughtfully approached, this might make more sense. There might be a happy medium that would improve access and not detract from the incredible recreational experience that Cumberland is supposed to offer. I don't want to go to Cumberland if I can't find quiet. I don't want to go to Cumberland if I can't find solitude. I won't. And I know a lot of other visitors feel the same way. And so I think it's really important that through all of these details, and there are a lot of them, though, that you really explain to the Park Service what makes Cumberland special and the responsibility they have to protect that. Is probably what I have to add.
Well said.
Sorry. I feel strongly about this.
How often and how many days is the island considered at capacity each year?
They don't provide that data.
Yeah. And again, the plan cites visitor use data from 2019 is the earliest data that they cite. So we don't even know really how many people are arriving by ferry annually. And they do acknowledge that it's extremely difficult to calculate how many people actually come to the island annually, because something like 40% of visitation is arriving by private access. All right. It has been described to me by Cumberland Island staff that the current plan has been set for so many years without review, and if better plans are available in 2026, it is worth updating. Noted. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the comments. Doesn't seem like the horse issue will be taken into account at all. We're going to see more horse incidents with the increased visitor amounts, also concerning alligator interactions, water parasite illnesses. Yeah. I think if safety is a concern for you, and there are particular points of the plan where you want to see a more robust visitor safety plan, please tell the Park Service that. Email Superintendent Trenchik, include that in your public comments, because we agree. We as an organization do not want to deter recreational opportunities or visitation of a place that that is beloved to us. I want as many people in my life to experience Cumberland Island as possible, but I don't want to do that and risk what makes Cumberland special in exchange. And so, and I certainly don't want anybody that I love getting injured or having, an incident on the island, and for that incident also to not be handled appropriately. And so, advocate for safety if that is a concern of yours.
Anybody want to come off mute and give Danny a break from reading these tiny questions on the screen? Thankfully, she's doing that for me because I don't have my glasses tonight. But is there anybody who wants to come off mute? I want to make sure while you catch up, Danny, if there's anybody out there with anything else to say, that they get a chance to have their voice heard. We don't like hiding behind screens.
Danny and Jess, this is Stephen. One thing you might want to share with everyone is, if they write to the superintendent, please copy their federal regulators. There's both representatives and their senators. That's really important. And I strongly urge that with any kind of letters that go to the superintendent. Thanks, guys. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, excellent advice. I think it is really important for all of us to let our elected officials know how important this is to us.
Mm-hmm. And our elected officials have authority of congressional oversight on federal agencies, and so they have influence that that we don't in and of ourselves. but also every single voice here does matter, and it does inform management. We didn't mention that in 2022, there was a very large negative public reaction to the proposed VUMP. And we've thus far been able to, prevent some of the really harmful aspects of the proposed management plan from being implemented. And so please write your public comments, contact the super, let her know what matters to you. And yes, please include all of your representatives on those emails.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right. All right, so we've got one more comment, and I think it's mostly been addressed by folks answering each other, and thank you for making our work a little easier. But during the 3 busiest months, the ferry carried 199 passengers per day in 2019. That's only 66% utilization. 3 lowest months were less than 22% utilization. And that is from from the Park Service data that they cite in the VUMP.
Okay.
That's from 2022 VUMP. And I believe
22. Okay.
I believe that's the same data that they used in 2026. But it's a really large plan, so don't quote me on that.
Well, and there are a lot of factors that I think that haven't been considered into what the actual use rate is. I mean, rec.gov's limitations, the booking system, weather, and there are so many factors I think that should probably be considered when they do that type of analysis. I don't know how they conjured this one up.
Yeah.
Okay. Got more?
So
we couldn't have done that good of a job. Like, I mean, this is a lot of material, and it's really hard to understand how they're all related and sort of contextualize them, and looking at them in cumulative fashion is probably even more challenging. I think the tool on our website does a really good job of that. And I think, does your map even show the sea level rise compared to the development? Because there is that part that's really important visually. Okay,
yeah,
maybe we'll get there.
Public version of the map, but there are some helpful public resources about erosion levels and sea level rise that you can certainly access, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction if you want to get into the nitty and the gritty.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And just one more comment that I personally really appreciate. So thanks particularly for your comments on safety. The waterway is not conducive to, chat's going off right now, is not conducive for rental to inexperienced paddlers. For example, the strong current and periodic high winds. And I agree. I personally am a paddler, and I'm excited about the potential opportunity to rent a kayak on the island, but I don't want to do it if it's not in safe conditions. And understanding tide charts and understanding high winds and the strong currents, especially on the southern tip of the island at the St. Mary's Inlet, I find those to be really important factors to consider. And I would be really concerned about somebody being pulled out into open ocean if they're not a strong enough paddler and not reading the tide charts. So, these are
a lot of risk there.
Definitely concerns that we hold as well. And if you have questions about erosion and sea level rise, contact CJ Jackson.
Thank you, CJ.
Reach out to CJ.
Excellent.
And thank you so much, everybody. I believe these are all the questions that we've received thus far. So last call for any questions that we can answer or attempt to answer.
We can stay on for a few minutes too, but we are going to put this recording up on online, wherever that will be. we will make sure you know all the places so that you can reference it and share it with those who couldn't make it tonight. And we'll be following up with everybody with links and any information that you might need to be able to feel prepared to write your own comments. I think it is really important to think about what the agency has proposed and whether it's congruent with what Congress intended for the park and the subsequent wilderness designation has provided all of us for the last 50 years. It's really, really important that you engage on this one. So thank you for taking the time to be here. As I said in the beginning, even though I was fumbling with my words a little, there are a lot of things demanding your attention and your energy right now. And so we really appreciate that you have some time and energy for Cumberland Island. So
Yeah.
thanks,
Oh,
everybody.
and just to reiterate, the deadline for public comments as of right now is February 6th at 11:59 p.m. Mountain Time. Just get the comments in by February 6th. Don't risk missing the deadline. And we did provide some links in the chat to the public comment portal and where you can go and download the report. They're on our website. We also provided a link to the website, and we'll be following up with everybody since you've registered for this meeting. You'll have a link to the recording, and we can share all the most important stuff,
Yep.
like link to our website and link to the public comment portal and the report when we follow up with you.
And certainly, if you have any questions, let us know. We're easy to find.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
joining us.